I also feel like poetry, when it's good, it's not really you thinking and writing, it's you kind of transmuting what's happening.
Hi, I am Trundle. Welcome to Atticus on Air. This is our second episode, and I am just thrilled to have a guest here today who is a poet, lives in New Jersey. Her name is Marcia LeBeau. Welcome, Marcia.
Thank you, Boo. Glad to be here.
So the reason we're talking to Marcia today is because Marcia agreed to be in our NFT experiment. We are posting her poem on Thursday, and it's our fourth in a series of NFTs. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say NFT, and if you're new to the Atticus podcast, then I definitely recommend that you go look at our website. We have explanations there about the what and the why of the NFT experiment. We are publishing everything that we post is coming out as an NFT, and you can also read on our website the way that we have been doing traditionally for 15 years. So Marcia's poem is coming out on Thursday. Do you want to read the poem for us now so that we can know what we're talking about?
Sure.
Thanks.
A misplaced tropical pond leads to a feminist daydream. There's a body of water in New Jersey that looks like a tropical sea. A German immigrant named Johann Voss bought the land with White Lake on it 260 years ago. Johann had four wives because three of them died during childbirth. I don't know much about the Mrs. Vosses, but I gather from the moment they married Mr. Voss, they tended and bred almost everything in that home until the day they bled out for life. I'm curious if they wondered what it was all for as they dizzily watched the patch of raspberry preserve slowly stain the white sheet beneath them, the one they had laundered only last week. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that poem, which is why we chose it to publish it on Atticus Review. Let's talk a little bit about the process of writing the poem. I know that you had not seen White Lake before you wrote the poem, and then a week ago we went to see it, and so there was some dissonance between what you thought you saw in your mind and what you saw in reality. So why don't you just tell us a little about the history of how you came to write the poem?
So I was writing a poem every day in July, which I do every July. I give myself that challenge. And I had been kayaking with a friend, which I never do. Well, at least not in New Jersey. And I loved it so much, I wanted to do it more. And she was like, "Oh, there's so many lakes in New Jersey." She goes all the time. She says there's even one called, I don't even know if she knew the name. She just knew that there was this tropical pond in New Jersey. And I was like, that sounds so intriguing and strange for New Jersey. So when I got home, I Googled it and I found White Lake. And, then I started going into the history because that's right on the homepage of, Mr. Voss and his wives. And, that spurred the poem for the day because how could it not? I don't know. It's pretty interesting. I think it was actually a much longer poem when I first, with a lot more pieces of the history, but um, I kind of just cut it and became more about, the wives than the actual lake, which was interesting
That is
to me.
interesting. That's really interesting. So I have lots of questions about it. So first of all, so what happens to a longer poem that becomes a shorter poem? Like, do you keep the pieces? Like, if I said, "Oh, I want to see what you cut," do you have it somewhere on your computer, or do you just you burn them digitally and they no longer exist?
No, what I usually do is if I think they're worthy a little bit, I will cut and I'll paste them. I'll put them down in the second page of the poem,
Hmm.
below the poem. Once I'm done the poem, I sometimes erase it just so I don't keep printing out the scraps at the end. But I could possibly go back and see if I have, but I wouldn't want to show it to you because it's not the part that worked for me.
Yeah, it's
So
in the
it's probably
garbage can. It's like going
Yes.
into the garbage and pulling out when you're looking for something and you have to reach in through all the stinky stuff. Like, where's
Exactly.
my
It's like
earring? So okay, that was my first question. The second thing is, well, this is not really poetry related, but you said you don't kayak very often, so you went kayaking with your friend on a lake. Do you never, like, what's your kayaking lifestyle?
experience.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I'm because
Kayaking.
I think it's very
I,
scary. I think kayaking
oh,
because
really?
this, well, on rivers it's pretty scary because you have to know how to roll. You
Oh,
have to know how to roll yourself back
oh
up if
yeah.
you.
I don't do that kind of
No,
stuff.
this is just like
Just
a
on lakes in New
yeah.
Hampshire. Because I
Uh,
think like growing up, we used to like canoe in New Hampshire,
mhm.
but then canoes are like out. I don't
They're
know. I feel like
passe. Yeah,
they're very
everybody
passe
kayaks.
and kayak. It's much easier to kayak. They're lighter.
Uh-huh.
We had like single kayaks, and it was just really
Yeah.
nice to. I think it's nice to single kayak next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
No. So yeah, I don't kayak often. I wish I did. You know, it's a lot. My parents used to have one, and they put it on top of the car, and it's hard. You know, they had to sell it when they got too old to put it up there.
Oh, okay. Well, it's interesting because you thought she told you it was a tropical pond. And so the thing about it that intrigued you was how could there be a tropical pond in New Jersey? And when I looked up, I also Googled it after I read the poem or after I found out it was based on a real place. And I guess the bottom of it's a pond, it's not really a lake. And the
Right.
bottom, but it's called White Lake, which is very typical of New Jersey. Just the naming, the whatever goes into naming places in New Jersey is there's no rhyme or reason. So it's called a lake. It's really a pond. I guess what's tropical about it is at the bottom has shells on it in some places, and so it looks white.
Mm.
Is that did you
I
read about
guess
that
that's
or
probably in my scraps.
maybe
Like,
that's in your scraps? Yeah, I did not see
right?
the lake. I didn't see the shells when we went. So another thing that we saw, yeah. So Marcia and I took a field trip and we went out to White Lake. Another thing that we saw was the house. The house is still there. So I guess the house was originally built in like 1794 and then it maybe burned down like so many things did back then and then they rebuilt it and it's still there. So it's a historic site in New Jersey. So I'm just curious, do you have a lot of poems where, if I looked up Johann Voss, it's a real person? Is it common for you to write poetry that's so grounded in truth
Uh,
or
well,
fact? You know what I'm saying? Like
or
historical
fact
facts?
or
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
I mean, this is very rare for me
Yeah.
to like take something out of history. Unless I have a prompt, I feel like I don't do that. I'm usually like drawing on my own experiences for
Mm-hmm.
poems. Are they true? I mean, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yes, I know. I quickly amended it from truth to fact, which I guess there's a slight difference between those words. So okay, so let's talk a little bit about the title, the feminism part. Like I was saying to Marcia before we started the podcast, when we publish an NFT, we always accompany it with a newsletter. And we're trying the model behind the NFT publishing is a bit like the art gallery model, where we see ourselves as curators. We are offering a digital asset that can be collected in the same way that a painting can be collected. And if we're going to be curating and offering something to be invested in or purchased, then we want to put our money where our mouth is. Is that it? Or is it put your mouth where your money is? Put your mouth.
No,
We want to put our
first one.
mouth. Well, I think it's the first one. Put your money where your mouth is, but we're trying to
Yeah.
put our mouth where our money is.
Right,
So
exactly.
our digital money, our digital currency. So we want to tell you, why should I invest in Marcia LeBeau? And so that's what the concept is behind the newsletter. So when I was writing the newsletter, there's things that I wrote about and that I think are good for us to talk about. So it's kind of like in my head, I have an outline of the things that we can talk about. And one of them is feminism. You have the word feminist in the title. And then the poem, in terms of its meaning, there is a suggestion that there was some injustice to the like quick replacement of wives, and also some tragedy in the fact of, let's just say, the raspberry preserves. So do you want to just like address that? Basically, I'm asking you to address the the possible feminism in the poem, the word feminism in the title, and then on a broader sense, we can talk a little bit more about your body of work after that.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to what I was saying before about um, I started writing about a lake and then it became the wives because that interested me much more than a tropical pond in New Jersey. Um, that these wives were replaced easily. And so then as I wrote it, I was like, oh, this is like feminist. This is like, this is injustice and this is makes me angry. And I wanted to showcase that. I think I like to, um, so then I put the feminist daydream in the title because I wanted people to really look at that. I think Tropical Pond is interesting, but I also think feminist daydream, and how that evolved out of the pond um, was really interesting to me. I oftentimes write longer titles um, just to I don't know. I came from an advertising background, and I always like to draw people in to my poems because I if you don't get them with the title or the first line, they're going on to the next, unless it's an NFT. But they're going on to
Wow.
the next page or the next. Um, I just feel like it was an important to get what was going to go on, but not give it all away in the title. Yeah. I don't know if I answered the whole question.
Well, no, I had already set the question up to sort of move from just the poem to your body of work. So I will just say that, Marcia had her first book of poems come out last year, A Curious Hunger, and it's a beautiful book and it's got a beautiful cover. Um, and like I would say like, I'm a fiction writer, I'm not a poet. And I sometimes struggle with my credentials as a editor of poetry and as a reader of poetry because I'm not a poet. And I would say, as a not poet, that your poems are very readable. Like it's a readable book of poetry. Like I read the whole book, start to finish. I don't find your poems to be inscrutable or puzzly. I just think like, there is, I do, if I said this in the newsletter actually, that sometimes like like your poems will, like a screenplay, there'll be a reversal, like where you think you're going one place and then you go different place and that some of your poems are a bit winky, like they wink at you, like like it's not necessarily funny, but there's a certain irony in a lot of your work. And then I would also say, like I told you about this review I read by Christina Cook in the Rumpus. She talked about the body, the female body, and your focus or um, inclusion of the female experience in your work. And I'm not sure if Christina used the word feminism, but since the word feminism is in the title, like I just, yeah, that the second part of my question was just to talk about your relationship with your own body and the female body and how feminism plays into your entire oeuvre as a poet.
Well, I think feminism plays into it because I do feel the injustice and I like to write about it. It helps me. It's almost therapeutic. Um, and my relationship with my own body, um, I, I think I have to write about like the body, the physical. The physical is so important. That's how we ground ourselves. Um, it's always going to come out in my poems. Like I don't sit down to write something. It just happens, right? So the body is all part of it. It's all part of the way the way it comes out. I know that's not very articulate.
Well,
Um,
even the title of your book, A Curious Hunger, um, could be interpreted as a commentary on the body, on like a body process of being hungry or food, and the relationship
desire.
between desire. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on, in that direction, I think what I'm sure no one listening knows about you is that you're also an energy worker. Um, and so can you talk about that a little bit and how that maybe plays into being a poet and also your relationship
Mm,
with your body? I mean, I know it's a
mm.
huge part of who you are, but it feels like it doesn't get a lot of broadcast
No, it
compared
doesn't.
to the poetry. So do you want to talk about it a little bit or?
It doesn't. Yeah, I'll talk about it. I came to energy work before poetry. Um, I had like a massage at one point in the West Village where like somehow some energy got released and I didn't know what was going on. So I started looking into it. And I think it's I was so interested in because it's like connecting to the divine, right? That's how we clear our energy. That's how I work with other people and clear their energy. I'm just a conduit to help them clear their energy. I also feel like poetry, when it's good, is it's not really you thinking and writing, it's you kind of transmuting what's happening, going through your spirit. So they are related in that way. I mean, I feel like that's the goal. I mean, I don't want to get too deep here, but I think that's the
I
goal
don't think you can get too
in
deep.
okay. I think that's the goal in life, um, is to find that clarity, trust the intuition, um, and that will lead you where you need to go in life, in your creative pursuits, um, in everything. So I think we get taken away from that. Poetry brings me back. Energy work brings me back. I spent a lot of time thinking, what can bring me back? Because life is chaotic. We have a million things going on, but how can we get centered and grounded and connect to source so we know um, the way that we're, meant to go in a really genuine way.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think people talk about poetry as a practice, the same way that we would talk about meditation as a practice or spirituality as a practice. So, I also feel the same way about writing, that it is on some level an energetic practice. And, what I hear you saying is that you're more of a channel, and that, that you're channeling something. And certainly here in this poem where, it's almost a ghost story where you're channeling the energy of these dead wives, who probably didn't have a voice to speak for themselves.
Mm,
I doubt that I mean, they could have been, the hidden Emily Dickinson before Emily Dickinson, but I'm guessing they probably didn't have a poetry practice. So yeah, I think that I get it too. I feel like there's unseen energies, unseen beings, that can be voiced in a poem. How do you feel in terms of poetic practice? You mentioned prompts. How do you feel that like, about prompts and exercises as a poet, as a way to get access to energies that you wouldn't have access to otherwise?
I like prompts a lot. I think look, I like good prompts and I hate bad prompts. But a good prompt for me might not be a good prompt for somebody else. It's a very personal thing. I mean, I just started doing some prompts with the Book of Alchemy, the new Suleika Jawad book, and their essays followed by a prompt, and they're what get my morning going. That's how I don't have much time to write anymore. So if I commit to that and do those prompts, then I know I'm going to be writing. And there's no pressure, you know. I mean, as a poet, I don't think we have as much pressure as other kind of writers.
Well,
Nobody's
maybe not
waiting
as much.
for.
No, not as much pressure, but also there's a sort of a commitment to self, like to honor your own need to write, your own need to make that space that you were talking about earlier. It's almost like a meditation practice or any kind of self-discovery practice. Like you're right, like I said, it's easy to push ourselves aside. It's easy to ignore our deeper selves and just be binge watching TV or, gossiping. Those are just like two examples of just like things that when I do it, I know it doesn't feel good and I know it's not, I'd much rather be, reading the letters of Vincent van Gogh, but like it takes a little more energy to do that. Um, so let's talk a little bit about place and the play. We're going back to the poem. So as we return back to the poem, do you mind reading it again? I know
Sure.
as a poetry, um, I'm not going to even call myself a consumer of poetry, but as an audience for poetry, sometimes I'll hear a poem the first time and I just want to hear it again because I there's something I missed or there's something I spaced out on. So let's hear it again.
Yeah, I agree. A misplaced tropical pond leads to a feminist daydream. There's a body of water in New Jersey that looks like a tropical sea. A German immigrant named Johann Voss bought the land with White Lake on it 260 years ago. Johann had four wives because three of them died during childbirth. I don't know much about the Mrs. Vosses, but I gather from the moment they married Mr. Voss, they tended and bred most everything in that home until the day they bled out for life. I'm curious if they wondered what it was all for as they dizzily watched the patch of raspberry preserve slowly stain the white sheet beneath them, the one they had laundered only last week.
Thank you. I feel like that needs to
Thanks.
sit for a minute. So yeah, so I would like to ask about I would like to talk about visual art and ekphrasis and starting, not to ignore the poem, but with the poem again as a starting point. So, as I said, we're publishing this as an NFT, and so far, what we've been doing is making woodblock prints for each of the NFTs. And so, when I spoke to David, the publisher, about what should we do to illustrate this poem? Like, what's the image that we want to bring out of a tropical pond feminist daydream vibe. Like what's the drawing going to be? And I was a little bit at a loss because drawing a lake, especially in a sort of primitive wood block, it would just be a circle, like with like I don't know. I was just like I don't know how I'm gonna, and I'm not, and I am currently also the illustrator. Just for now, it's gonna end soon. But I don't have the technical skill to do like a beautiful lake scene with willows and fish. It's just going to be a lake. It's going to be a circle. So David was the one who said, "Well, how about the raspberry preserves?" And I mentioned it to you, and for me, like at first, I just thought, "Oh, a jar of raspberry preserves." Although it's easy to draw, like how does that relate to the lake? And I mentioned it to you, and you were like, "Oh, I like that. That's my favorite part of the poem." So first of all, why is it your favorite part of the poem? And then we'll go from there.
It's my favorite part of the poem because it's the part that surprised me the most. Um, I got to that, and it represented the blood, and then her like dizzily being like thinking it's raspberry preserve, and the image and also the feeling of that. Like I felt her, I felt the woman who was dying in childbirth. Um, and I just was like very pleased with that. And then I said, and the one they had laundered only last week that got into the feminist part of it. Um, it's tangible. I mean, how different are blood and raspberry preserve, right? But they're conflated to be the same thing.
Hmm.
It was very interesting to me that that
Hmm.
happened. And I love when I'm surprised by, to me, I feel like a poem isn't done until until the writer is surprised, because the reader is not going to be surprised if the writer's not surprised.
Yeah, I think this idea of like just those sheets being stained with the blood. I again, I was writing this newsletter for this NFT, and I have to write this little thing at the end. It's just like a little short form thing. It's just broad strokes, just like a little like a slogan almost that would like encapsulate the NFT. And I think for this, I wrote something like bloody sheets, they happen every day, something like that. It's just like as a woman, like when not, like when you're, I'm now in menopause, I don't have my period anymore, but when you have your period, or I think I'm out of menopause, thankfully, and I do not miss my period. But when you are a young woman and you have your period, you bleed all over everything every month, every month. I don't care what kind of, I mean, maybe I had a heavy period, but I didn't care what I did at night. I was always going to stain a sheet. Like if I went to a hotel, for example, when I had my period, I would be like, oh boy, like I'm going to stain this sheet, and it's just such a part of our lives, but it's just something that nobody ever talks about, or, it's not that it's even a taboo. It's just nobody ever talks about it. Everybody's too busy talking about baseball. But yeah, like, I like that you include it because it's just like very humdrum. Like, and back then, I'm sure too, just like bleeding out during a birth was not unusual. So why not write
Yeah.
about it? So I appreciate that, just kind of like, let's just demystify the bloody sheets.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
I
somebody's
write about
washing
everything.
them.
I write about everything else. Why not write about
Yeah.
bloody sheets? Yeah.
And somebody's washing them. I mean,
Right?
not throwing them
Yeah.
away. And so, I mean, I'm in a hotel room right now, and like, I just so I appreciated that. I just think as an image, it's not something that we often write or talk about, but as a woman, especially when you're still like menstruating, which is such a dumb word, you're staining sheets. And if you're having a baby, there's gonna be a lot of blood, even in a hospital setting. So,
Right.
appreciated
And
that
if the
the
baby
reality of
dies,
it.
it's going to be a lot of blood, you know.
Right.
It's like, but really, like that just came, like, I don't know, that just came to, I didn't, that again, that was like channeled. That was definitely
Right.
channeled. I wasn't thinking like dying in childbirth, blood, 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 you
Yeah,
know.
you were thinking like kayaking on a beautiful lake in New Jersey. Next thing you know, there's a bloody sheet.
You know,
I know how that
that's
goes.
pretty typical of my stuff.
Yes, that's typical of me as well. So moving on from there to just sort of the larger question about art, and so yeah, what I was going to say was that when I did the woodblock, so I did do the raspberry jar, and I tried to basically I Googled a photo of like spilled jam on a table, and then I was trying to make a wood block of a jar of jam spilled on a table. And what ended up happening is it ended up looking like a lake because of the way that I carved it. And so I sent you the photo, and as I looked at it, I was like, wow, it looks like a jar of jam being spilled into a lake, which is exactly
Mhm.
what it should be. And I am happy with the result, but it was an accident. It was one of those happy accidents. And the less you know about a tool, like a carving wood, I'm not very good at it, the better the art in some ways, because the mistakes that you make create these new images. And in the same way, like I do think it's kind of linked to poetry because, in that crack or that space between like what I was trying to draw and what I actually drew, and then the way that the ink interacted with the wood, which I just used like really bad wood from Home Depot to do these wood blocks. And I took a workshop and everybody was like just horrified that I was using Home Depot wood. But like in a way, I didn't know. I was like, it's wood. But like, in a way, because I ignorantly was using this really trashy wood, I end up coming up with these really shocking images because of the way the ink interacts with the plywood. And so, not shocking, but fun. So we ended up with a wood block, which you can see. I'm speaking to the listeners now, but if you want to check out her NFT, it's on our website, and it looks like a jar of jam being spilled into a lake. So I wanted to just talk to you about art in general, segueing from there, because I know that you also have a visual art practice and that you are also keen to, or not hip, you're hip to the relationship between poetry and visual art. So can you just talk a little bit about how you use the two together and separate, and we're gonna wrap up soon, but just
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
that.
Um, I love watercolor. I love doing watercolor. I love sketching. It's just more of a fun practice to me. I love it because it's so low stakes. I never think I'm going to do anything with my pieces. Um, so that maybe, you know, I take more risks with them, not as precious. And so connecting them, sometimes I like to illustrate my poems. You know, I like to say, oh, I'll find an image and then do a watercolor of that image. And I actually did a broadside show at one point where I had my, watercolor next to the poem, made them a broadside. And I think it adds, it's more dimension to the poem,
Hmm. And then
to
on the
to
reverse
the
of
work.
that, don't you sometimes start with an image and write a poem from the image? Is that something, I feel like you taught a workshop on that,
Sometime,
or?
I mean, with acrostic definitely. Yeah. But it's not my work, right? So Um, yeah, and I teach workshops and I do readings. Taking a painting or a sculpture, any piece of art, and then writing a poem. I find that, you know, very inspiring to take art and do something with it. But those take time. Those really take time because I feel like the first pass is never really the poem that's going to be the final. I just keep working and working and working until I find the meat um, of what the painting really wants to say. And I love reading other people's ekphrastic poems and seeing sometimes you'll read the poem and it'll say after, whatever the painting is, and then I have to see it. I can't imagine not going and Googling the piece of art and seeing how they interact with each other. Yeah. So visual art and writing, so key. Um, so the interaction is fantastic and inspiring.
Well, segueing from that, I found your poem to be fantastic and inspiring, and I hope that people who are listening to this podcast will check the poem out on our website. And there was a lot that I wanted to talk to you about that we didn't get to. We kind of agreed on a half hour. And I would suggest reading the newsletter that I used to introduce the NFT, like why you should collect Marcia LeBeau. If you have any questions, I know after this conversation, you have no questions about that anymore. But if you want to know more about it, check out the website, read the newsletter. It talks a little bit about the right space and, your life as a literary citizen, a poet who also supports other writers. So I really don't have time to get into that, but I just want to thank you for showing up for this conversation. I want to thank you for being willing to play the NFT experiment with us. And yeah, just thank you for coming.
Thank you, Boo, and thank you for the woodcut because it is actually really beautiful.